Brilliant. Welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar on business models for nature positive outcomes. My name's Elliot Whittington. I'm Chief System Change Officer at CISL. I'm just going to repeat myself and start this again, just because I think we've just gone through the process of allowing everybody into this webinar. So welcome, good afternoon, and glad people could join us for this webinar on our Better Business Work. My name is Elliot Whittington. I am Chief System Change Officer here at CISL, and we're really pleased to have so many people joining us for today's discussion. It's a really important opportunity to talk about the work that's required to help shift business models to unlock more important nature positive outcomes. I'm going to introduce it, and then we will talk about the work, and people will be able to ask questions. I should say, if it's not already clear, that we're recording today's webinar, so if you're asking questions, if you're feeding things in, be aware of that. Just want to make sure people are aware and happy with that, and use the Q&A function as a route to ask questions. So we're going to start off. I'm going to briefly introduce today's conversation, and then we will go through the work that we've been able to do, and we'd love to get people's input, people's questions, and be able to discuss that. Maybe if I move on by just starting to talk a little bit about CISL and our work, and if we could move on to the first slide. Brilliant. So for those of you who don't know us, CISL, we are a department in the University of Cambridge, but we are a mission-driven organisation. We work to develop leadership and solutions for a sustainable economy, particularly transitioning that economy into one that works for people, nature and climate. We do a range of activities which covers everything from the world-leading education that we provide, both online, in person, accredited programs like master's courses, customized programs, a whole range of things. We crucially work with a community of startups and entrepreneurs trying to catalyze new solutions and new ideas. But critically, we also bring together and build alliances between business and government, between financial sector institutions, drawing together academic expertise to inform those conversations. But relevant to this conversation, drawing on all of that work, all of the contact we have with the business community, all of the expertise we're able to tap into in Cambridge, and the fact that we have a network around the world of over 40,000 leaders and innovators, allows us to develop new thinking, new ideas about the routes to transition towards a sustainable economy. So we deliver a body of work we call Foresight, research and analysis that distills some of the lessons and learning that we've got. And one key area for that is the work that we do on nature. We could move to the next slide, please. So I'm sure many of the people on this call that you're listening to me, this will not be a surprise, but of course, why does nature matter? I think it is something that is a critical concern, and I think this is being increasingly well understood. Broadly speaking, so one of the best ways of measuring the impact of the global economy on the environment that we sit within is the concept of planetary boundaries. And depending on how you structure them, we can see a huge number. Six major planetary boundaries are being exceeded, are being the economy is operating in a way that is beyond the capability of the environment to cope with. We are seeing this impact on the natural world scaling up. We're seeing the fact that whether it's in the private sector or the public sector, the ways that the economy is operating are contributing to dramatic an extinction moment in terms of many biodiversity species, are depleting natural resources beyond the ability of the planet to recoup them. So we are moving into a space which is entirely unsustainable. Really important contribution to that conversation took place in Montreal a couple of years ago at the COP15 event for the global biodiversity, the UN Convention on Biodiversity, where a new global biodiversity framework was set out that laid out a plan to halt or reverse nature. That conversation was picked up this year with COP16, which saw the greatest ever level of business engagement in this conversation. So I think there is a growing understanding of the fact that nature is material to the economy, it's material to business, that the risks of not managing and turning around this impact on nature really turn up in terms of the viability of businesses in the future, that we are creating risks that are systemic, they are manageable, and that they will be visible in the commercial reality of businesses more and more. So whether that's in access to water, whether it's in access to the kind of like the ecosystem services that are essential in terms of producing key parts of our economy, whether it's in the kind of the broader things. So as we see, for example, food production, energy production, different forms of land use become more challenging because of the impact on nature, that will turn up in terms of greater costs in the economy, which will feed through in terms of inflation, and so has greater potential for disruption. So it's a real risk. It's a real material risk to the economy as well as to society and to the systems that we rely on. We move on to the next slide. So for CISL, this has been a major focus of us. We have been finding ways to talk about it. We were present in COP, did a number of events and activities there. We have been doing research on that, and whether it's talking about the financial materiality and the financial impact of nature-related risks, whether it's talking about how business models need to change, whether it's providing tools for businesses and financial institutions to manage and understand nature, or map out the links between business and nature. We have been trying to contribute to the process of helping the private sector think about this, running conversations and partnerships to look at that. So much of that has been covered in the media, and so we've been present talking about our work on nature and trying to move that forward. I guess particularly relevant to us, I mean, we are lucky to be part of the University of Cambridge. We sit here in Cambridge, where it is home to one of, if not the world's largest conservation hubs. So we know we have access to many of the primary conservation organizations in the world, and doing incredibly useful work. And I think probably one of the key things that we focus on in that conversation is, because of our work with business, finance and government, is looking at the way that the economy impacts on nature. So we don't start from the point of view of how do we improve or grow the amount of nature that is protected, that is conserved. We start from the point of view of how does the economy need to change, because that's the audiences and that's the space that we work with. Both really important lenses, but it's just kind of worth noting that the lens that we bring to this conversation. So if we move on to next slide, please. The work that we're talking about today is part of a project that we're very proud to be part of. It's called the ATRAC project. And the goal of this, it brings together an amazing consortium. You can see the logos on here. And the goal of this project, I think, is very much to look at that question about how to mainstream activities to restore and protect nature into the economy. So working with business, with financial institutions, with governments, and bringing, so the concept of natural capital has been the core concept that we've been using, but I think the end outcome of transforming the way economic modes of operation, so that they understand impact on nature, that they protect nature, and that they restore nature is critical across that. There are a number of different work packages led by different parts of the consortium. CISL is leading two, and we're going to be talking to you about one today. So work package 5, which is all about business models that contribute to nature positive outcomes, and work package 6, which is all about mapping the routes to scale up finance that contributes to nature positive outcomes. So today we are focusing on work package 5. So the work that we have done around business models, and we're as I say, we're really interested in being able to tell you about that work in detail, and also hearing thoughts and questions around that. Next slide, please. We published that work just ahead of, or shortly before, COP16 in October. 2 key outcomes, so a detailed paper, Better Business, but also a briefing note, Business Naturally, which just kind of really summarizes that and makes that work accessible. So if you haven't already seen those, please do look that up. The work that we delivered, I think in developing that, we did a workshop in Cambridge in the summer, And we also talked about this work while we were at COP16 with a workshop there. So there's been an ongoing process of engagement with our business audiences, with other key experts in terms of developing that and bringing the thinking together. Next slide, please. So yes, I've set the ground, and I'm pleased to be able to kind of hand over to one of the key authors of that work. So Anam will take you through the report findings, and then I'm going to leave you here, but I look forward to the conversation, and I think that this is a really important opportunity to understand and hear about this work, and we welcome questions and comments, and so do use the Q&A function as you already are to share your input, and we would value and appreciate any kind of comments on that. Over to you, Adam.
Hi, thank you, Elliot, for laying out the broad context within which this report is situated. As Elliot mentioned, this is part of the A-Track project, which is a 4-year-long project. So it's being done in 4 phases. This year was phase 1. So year 1, they coincide roughly with the years. And it was looking to define the context to, lay out the state of play. And the research, it was primarily desk-based research with some business engagement and a little bit of validation, but mostly it was based in research. And our main research objectives for this phase were bridging the gap between theory and practice, operation and transformation, and innovation and sustainability. So there are a lot of organizations out there, like Elliot mentioned in his project, doing hero projects or feel-good projects. But we really wanted to understand what's the difference between a transformation in a business practice and a transformation at the business model, and how to embed that within organizations. And taking the theory, we also wanted to build the field further and extend academic theory around the subject and turn it into more, combine it with industry and practitioner literature to distill actionable insights that we're going to take into our next phases. One of the key aims of this phase was to develop a typology of business models that align with nature positive outcomes. We developed a typology consisting of 7 archetypes that I'll be talking about in a little bit. It was also, we wanted to start identify key contextual factors that impact the operation and or scale up of business models. And also, I think, synthesize a changed methodology about how businesses can start embedding this work within their business models. Our partners at Workplan 4, WBCST, are doing some work on this as well. And we look forward to working with them more closely in the next phases of the research. So this was phase 1, where we defined the state of play and the landscape. We are now moving on to 5.3, 5.2, phase 2 and phase 3, which will be validating and testing this work. And eventually, we hope to, in the last year of the project, have a pilot where, we make our engagement with businesses a little bit deeper. So I think, next slide, please. Most businesses are saying that, we invested all this time and resources in developing, a climate team that focuses on sustainability, so that team can just go ahead and do our nature policy, our nature strategy as well. But a nature-related transformation or developing a nature strategy comes with a few specificities that are, say, a little different from overall sustainability or climate strategies. First of all, I think nature impact is place-based. A lot of the locus of impact is the site of where projects are being developed or implemented. For instance, if a factory is dumping its sewage water, it's impacting the local river. If a company is doing intensive farming practices, it's impacting the local land. So a lot of that is place-based, as opposed to, say, carbon emissions, which are just released into the atmosphere. But that's not to say that this site-based impact doesn't aggregate. It aggregates at the landscape level, which then aggregates at the sector level, which aggregates at the national level, which then impacts the international nature and biodiversity goals. So that's why, nature goals are systemic rather than, it's very hard to quantify them at an to define them at an organization level, because the footprint of any economic activity will be non-zero. It's going to have some impact when it interacts with nature. So we have to define these goals in a systemic manner, so that organizations don't need to look at the impact, but how and why of the impact as well. The definition of nature positive doesn't, there are multiple ones out there. So companies, some of them are outcomes based, some of them are process based, some of them are conceptual. So companies looking to embark on a more nature aligned journey can struggle to see what is nature positive. Nature impact is difficult to quantify. Again, uh, doing the comparison with carbon emissions, there's an easy metric which can be quantified, but there's no standardized metric out there. A-Track is a work package too within A-Track is also working on contributing to this. And then businesses have a sort of symbiotic relationship with nature. They have impacts on nature, but they also have dependencies, and these create a lot of risks, which include physical risks to their supply chains, regulatory risks, market risks, reputational, as well as social, such as the health of people. So it's a complicated landscape, and you really need to understand it before you can start going on, embarking on a nature positive strategy. Next slide, please. So I don't want to bore you with the nitty gritty of our year-long research process, but I just I'll give a brief overview so that you know how we went about this process. So we started off with a literature review. We didn't just look at academic literature, but we also looked at a lot of industry and practitioner literature to identify the theoretical parameters of the study and also define the analytical framework. The key takeaway from that was that there's a lot of academic and industry literature that exists about sustainable business models, about circular business models, and regenerative business models, but there is little about nature positive aligned business models. There's a lot of literature on business practices that can contribute to nature positive outcomes, but there's not enough about nature positive in specific. But there is a little bit of an overlap between what is a sustainable business model, what is a circular business model, and what is a regenerative business models. And we sort of use that overlap to define our own nature positive aligned business models. We then identified a list of case studies. We relied on the databases of our partners like WBCST and CAPSCO, Capitalist Coalition. We use publicly available data from a lot of organizations working on nature. And then we relied on our own innovation team to identify startups that are doing a lot of interesting things in the nature space. We then used the business model canvas to analyze all these organizations. We clustered their business practices to start defining the archetypes. I will talk about them in a little bit in more detail. And then we moved on to the developing our typology. Next slide, please. So this is a business model canvas that I just mentioned. It was one of the key aspects of our analytical framework. We didn't develop this. This is quite established and canonical within business management literature. It was developed by Osterwalder and Pignor, and they defined a business model as something that is the rationale of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. This canvas sort of lays that out, and we use this to analyze the business practices of the organizations that we identified. A value proposition of a business is the unique benefit or solution a business offers to meet customer needs or solve their problems. An example of this could be a product's quality or its sustainability or affordability, basically their unique value proposition. The value creation is the process, resource, and activities used to generate value. Value capture is the mechanisms through which a business earns revenue and retains profit from its activities. An example of this could be, say, pricing strategies such as licensing fees or subscriptions. And value delivery is the methods and channels used to deliver the value proposition to customers. So this is the key aspects of a business, and this is where we began to draw this distinction between what is a business practice and what is a business model change. So a business practice change would be something that, say, only impacts one aspect of this canvas, whereas a business model change will be, when you're embedding that change into the organizations and different aspects of the business are creating together to contribute towards a nature positive outcome. Next slide, please. So as we saw that, value is a cornerstone of how we sort of define a business model. But then if value is the cornerstone of a business model, how do we define value? Is it just a utilitarian calculus? It is just because, value can be defined by revenue minus cost is equal to profit, or it can be defined, it can mean something else to different people. And this debate is not new in business or academic circles. It's been going on since maybe there's approaches such as Daly's triangle in the 70s that talk about steady state economy that focuses more on well-being. There's a triple bottom line approach that looks at marrying economics, environmental, and social value. But the approach that we took was has been developed by Forum for the Future, and it combines the natural capital approach with the five capitals approach. So value is something that takes all these different sorts of capital, not just financial capital, into account. So financial capital is the traditional economic measure of value. Manufactured capital is produced goods and assets. Social capital is the benefit that accrues to society. Such human capital is obviously human resources, and natural capital is the natural capital stock that preserves that leads to flows of ecosystem services. So if we want a business to look at its value proposition, and we need for them to consider all these stores of value, not just economic value. Next slide, please. So we identified, we talked about how a business needs to have a value proposition, and that value proposition needs to have alignment with nature positivity. So we identified some key principles for nature positive aligned actions. These are adapted from the European Business and Biodiversity Platform. For a business to start its journey, they must start aligning their value proposition with these principles. So it's very important that the business's goals are aligned with international commitments like the Global Biodiversity Framework. They must be ambitious. So, we want to be biodiversity neutral or positive by 2030, biodiversity neutral by 2030, and restoring and regenerating it by 2050. They need to be transparent, so there needs to be extended accountability through established metrics, standardized and established metrics. It needs to be mainstreamed, so it needs to be embedded across the organization, not just at one level. So from employee buy-in to board buy-in, it needs to be embedded across all aspects of the organization. It needs to be evidence, so science-based, based in science. It needs to be comprehensive, so it needs to include not just land, but water, the genetic level, so all aspects of nature, and it needs to be integrated in line with the mitigation and conservation hierarchy that has been defined by, by the nature sector. Next slide, please. So I just spoke about the mitigation and conservation hierarchy. That is a key instrumental principle when aligning with nature positive principles. This is because it sort of sets out a framework for how businesses can start aligning their practices and consequently their business models to have a net positive impact on nature. The hierarchy provides some conceptual clarity that can lead to a step change in how businesses, start taking their, undertaking their transitions. But the problem is that the mitigation hierarchy, which was developed for use at the site level, like I mentioned earlier, that a lot of nature impact is place-based. So that's how it has been traditionally used, that to look at the site level, but it has formed the basis for other more action-oriented frameworks. One of them has been developed by the Interdisciplinary Center for Conservation Science, called the Conservation Hierarchy: 4 Steps for the Earth. And there is another one called the Science-Based Target Networks Action Framework. So there's a lot of different tools that exist out there that align with the mitigation hierarchy that businesses can take. But a key thing to remember is that these frameworks are not a license for businesses to say maybe use offsetting to minimize, to dispense of their nature impact. They aim to deter businesses from expanding their nature impact and really look at how and why they are impacting nature, assessing their relationship with nature, and then, only using offsetting if necessary and in a socially sustainable manner. So they basically compel businesses to reevaluate their core value proposition. Next slide, please. So as you can see, I mentioned the science-based target networks action framework, and we picked that as a key aspect of our analytical framework because unlike the mitigation hierarchy, which is more useful at the site level, this focuses on the organization as a unit of change. And since we are looking at business model transitions, we felt that this was more aligned with our work, and it would provide a little bit more conceptual clarity for us. It follows the mitigation hierarchy quite closely, so I think it still has that thing at its heart where it wants businesses to start avoiding impact on nature, so focus on preventing harm to natural ecosystems by identifying where they are impacting and then mitigating that potential impact. Then the next step in the framework is restoring, so actively repairing degraded ecosystems. Then it goes beyond not just repairing and restoring, but also regenerating, so having a net positive impact on nature. And the last step, which is more of a systemic, so these are at the organizational level, and these organizational goals then need to focus, contribute towards a systemic goal of transforming systems so that, driving systemic change by integrating nature positive principles into organizational culture, into business models and policies for long-term impact. And like I mentioned, mentioned earlier, transparency and extended accountability are key aspects of nature positive aligned action. So tracking and track is the last step, which is monitoring progress and outcomes through robust metrics and feedback loops, ensuring transparency and continuous improvement. Next slide, please. So after all this research, like I said, we found a key gap in the literature was that there are definitions that exist for sustainable business models, for circular ones, and for regenerative ones. And while there is a lot of overlap, we felt that, this is a gap in, academic and practitioner literature. So based on all those aspects of our analytical framework, we arrived at a definition of nature positive aligned business models. And how we chose to define it, this is obviously since phase one. So I'm assuming that this definition will change, but we're starting off with this. It is a business model that is nature positive aligned is a financially viable business entity whose value proposition and rationale are centered around nature positive principle. This model captures, creates, and delivers value in harmony with natural, economic, and social capital within given landscapes, seascapes, ecologies, or ecosystems. It aims in the first instance to avoid, minimize, restore, and offset its impact on nature in line with the mitigation and conservation hierarchy, but must work towards ultimately contributing positively to nature conservation at both the organizational and systemic levels. Next slide, please. So one of the key outputs from this research was this typology, where we looked at different, like I said, we looked at different case studies. We had a list of about 80 to 90 businesses, including both larger businesses undertaking nature positive projects, and smaller startups developing new solutions that are aimed towards having a positive impact on nature. We use the business model canvas to analyze each business and cluster its practices. And from that grounded approach, we arrived at these 7 archetypes. I'm just going to run through them. So the first archetype is product and services to minimize nature impact. I think this business model is something that redevelops goods and services to have a relatively lower impact on nature. We know that some aspects of human activity are essential to our survival. For example, say vaccine development, medical research, harvesting food, but obviously they have a non-zero impact on nature. So this business model would really focus not just on those, but I think this will be helpful for businesses that need to, relooking at those essential goods and services and trying to minimize their impact on nature. The second one is a service model to minimize nature impact. So the product and services, I'll clarify this through a little illustration in a little bit, but the product and services focuses on how value is created and how it's captured. Uh, and a service model is something that focuses on value delivery. So this would be a service model change for the goods and services that are developed to have a minimized nature impact. The third archetype, so these two are would fall, say, in the avoid and minimize part of the action framework. So they would basically mean that there's no net loss from their activities, that there is no, because some of those activities, like I said, are essential or the technology doesn't exist to mitigate their impact. So what these would really aim for no net loss. The next archetypes, 3 and 4, regenerative products and services, and regenerative service models would aim to have a net positive impact. So regenerating basically. The archetype 3 is a business model that directly carries out restorative and regenerative activities, and archetype 4 is regenerative service model. So it operates a service model, so it delivers that value in a manner that preserves the nature positive characteristic of the goods and services developed. Because as we scale, sometimes even nature positive activities can tend to lose that impact that they're having. So this how that value is delivered would be a key aspect of this business model. Another archetype is businesses mitigating or restoring, changing their impact through value chain reconfiguration, and this is they're implementing changes or innovations how value is created across key activities, stakeholders, and capabilities along the supply chain. Archetype 6 is supplementary service provision. This business model, while it doesn't undertake activities that are restorative or regenerative, it would provide services or goods that enable other organizations to undertake activities. This can include, data analysis or natural capital accounting services. And last is purposeful stewardship. This business model will generate nature positive outcomes through education, awareness raising, and consensus building. I must stress that this is a working paper. We have a limitation of this research was that we picked businesses based on based on qualitative analysis. We each businesses that we looked at, we didn't obviously have access to their metrics, or we didn't have any sort of accounting about what their nature impact was. We just looked at their self-identified goals and aims, and then. But what we thought was, since these archetypes are theoretical, we can sort of use that still as that is normal for a grounded theory approach in academia. This is a working list, and we are really going to validate this list with much deeper and much more extensive business engagement in phase 2 and phase 3 of this project. Next slide, please. So this is, like I mentioned, this is how it's presented in the report. As you can see over here, you can see archetype 2 and archetype 3, and the business model canvas shows which parts of the business model this archetype really targets. So as you can see, for archetype 2, it's a service model, so it really focuses on the value proposition and the value delivery, where archetype 3 is developing products and services, so it really focuses on the value creation and the value capture. The value proposition needs to be green for a business that is nature positive aligned, as we discussed earlier. We also have some examples that are some of them are, almost all of them are based on real companies, but they have been anonymized because, like I said, we weren't able to the business examples that we used were qualitatively assessed. But if you read the report, please feel free to get in touch with us if you want to know more. Next slide, please. So we have this typology, but how does it feed into the larger aims of our, of the A-Track project? So what can the typology be used for? Is it a diagnostic tool? Is it a prescriptive tool? Is it a proscriptive tool? Does it tell businesses what to do, what not to do, what they're doing wrong? So I think, again, like I said, this phase was primarily desk-based research, but now we are hoping that it can be used in the following instances, and we're going to test and validate that in the next phase. So we're hoping that it can provide strategic direction to businesses for integrating native positive practices into their operations and supporting business model shifts. We hope that, if there's a sort of blueprint like this, it can facilitate sharing of best practices, enabling businesses to learn from peers and accelerate adoption. We are also hoping it can encourage innovation by inspiring exploration of newer hybrid approaches for nature positive outcomes. Uh, Something that's mentioned in the report, and I neglected to mention earlier when I was talking through the typology, is that obviously hybrids can exist. These archetypes don't exist in isolation. A business can both be developing goods and process, products that minimize nature impact, and also developing a service model. So I think it can encourage innovation to see where businesses can change their business practices to shift, maybe the dial on two of these archetypes. It supports risk management by identifying risks and opportunities, and it can also enable the formulation of key performance indicators that can eventually, we hope, allow for benchmarking and fostering continuous improvement. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that these archetypes they need to be operationalized with the real world. So they will have some boundary conditions on how they're applied. These boundary conditions are sort of proximate factors or constraints that impact the generalizability of a theoretical framework in real world conditions. So the first thing that we identified again, since it's a working paper, these might change based on our engagement with businesses. And once we start to implement, test and validate our typology, but based on our desk-based research, we can say something that would impact the size, operationalization of these archetypes is the size, scale, and maturity of the business. For instance, if a business is small, it has limited resources, but it is flexible, so it's more agile. It can change its business models more effectively. Whereas a large firm, say, has more resources at its disposal, but its operations are more set in stone, so it's not as flexible. Extent of dependency on nature will also have an impact on which archetypes a business can use and to what extent they can, implement them. For example, a business that is highly dependent on nature and has impacts that are hard to mitigate, it will impact how it operationalizes these. Which sector the business is positioned in is also a key boundary condition, because each sector comes with specific laws and regulations that impacted their sector specific value chains, their sector specific industry associations. So this is a key boundary condition as well. Availability of and accessibility to capital and finance. Against a lot of nature positive initiatives require a lot of upfront capital, and if there is not enough capital or financing available, it will impact the ability of a business to implement that change. They really need to look for green financing instruments, and our colleagues at CISL who are leading on Work Plan 6 are really looking into this, about how to accelerate the finance to help the business models transition. Again, there's need for innovation in technology is a key boundary condition, because some businesses might want to mitigate their impact, but the technology that they're required to do it might not exist. It might not be at a commercial scale. It might not be implementable with the given current resource constraints. So this is also a key, critical factor. And the nature of the drivers of change within the organization. For instance, if the business is being changed, is being compelled to change, maybe say through regulation, they maybe they'll just do the bare minimum. Whereas if the push is sort of internal, and the employees want the business to change, the board wants the business to change, the leadership wants the business to change, they might undertake a more effective and a more embedded transition. So I think these are key boundary conditions. I would like to just point out that These are different from, wider contextual factors. These are the boundary conditions on the operationalization of these archetypes. Obviously, there are wider context conditions like political, economic, and social that will also impact, market conditions about how, business models can be transitioned. But we will look at those in more detail in phase two. So this is where we are at with our research right now. We are really going to take this work and validate it first with experts, subject matter experts, and then establish more closer linkages with work packages across A-Track, and also work much more closely with businesses. And my colleague Harry will talk a little bit more about that. We will have time for Q&A right now or at the end, Edmund. I'm not sure.
Sorry if you can hear me. I think we'll take some. I'll just do a quick wrap up of our next steps, and then we'll take Q&A after that. So yeah, thanks a lot, Anam, for taking us through the really great piece of work that you've done. So yeah, I'm Harry Greenfield. I work with Anam and alongside others on this A-Track project, and I'm just going to quickly go through where we are in the wider project and what our next steps are and how you can help us out and get involved. So, and just a reminder as well to use the Q&A function to drop your questions for Anam or others in the team about anything you've heard today. So, as Anam said, this is part of a 4-year project. We're 1 year in, and she's just gone through in detail kind of where we are with creating this framework for a nature positive aligned business model. And as Anam suggested, the next step is to test this in various stages of detail and with different types of stakeholder over the coming years. So we want to validate this framework. So our first steps in the new year are going to be to continue to talk about the work we've done so far and to test it with different types of subject matter experts. And I'll talk a bit more about the opportunities to get involved in that. And then we're really looking at what the barriers are. So having identified the types of business model that we think the economy needs to shift towards, we want to look at what the barriers are to doing that. And this will look both at the organizational barriers, so barriers within companies to changing business models, some of which Anam's just covered in her final slide, but also the systemic barriers. So we want to look at what the policy landscape looks like and how that enables or prevents businesses from shifting towards nature positive aligned business models, as well as looking at other factors, including the financial sector. So as Anam said, working with the Centre for Sustainable Finance here at CISL and other colleagues in A-Track to look at how capital flows and investment can be aligned and put towards the right types of business models. Moving on from that, we're looking to test these solutions that we come up with, or test solutions with businesses. So we'll be running a series of accelerator programs towards the end of 2025 and into 2026, where we can kind of do deep dives over a series of months, potentially looking at different sectors and how business models can shift within those sectors. And the final aim will be to pilot the adoption or integration of new business models with a cohort of businesses that are looking to either create businesses that have new business models or shift business models within their existing business. And as I say, we've got some initial steps that we've got locked in for next year, and this is where we'd welcome people to join us on this journey. So we'll be holding a series of workshops to go through in some more detail the work that Anam has outlined today. We'll be holding one in person in Cambridge in the UK on the 5th of February, and the following week on the 11th of February we'll be doing an online version of that workshop. So we're hoping to find experts who can talk to some of the literature that we've looked at, some of the expertise on business model transformation, on innovation, and on nature, so that we can make sure that what we have set out in the working paper, to sort of stress test those ideas basically and make sure they're as robust as possible before we go into the more applied phases of the project. On the back of that, we'll be running some business focus groups. So those workshops will be more for non-business audience, although I think we have scope to include businesses within that. But the real, I guess, the meat of where we want to engage with businesses will be in a series of focus groups, which will be taking place online in the spring next year. We're likely to do a series of these. I think we're going to be doing some sectoral focused groups, as well as some cross-sectoral groups. So there's opportunities for businesses of different types to engage. We're also aware that as Anna mentioned, this looks different depending on the types and sizes of businesses. So at CISL, we work a lot with startups and entrepreneurs, and we want to look at that angle of this. So how people who are creating new businesses and to solve problems or to provide solutions can adopt a nature positive aligned business model and to have nature at the core of their thinking when they're setting up new businesses. But we also work with more established and larger businesses, and we want to look at where business model transformation comes into there. I think we see this as within A-Track, we talk about the maturity curve that businesses are on, so how far they are along on their nature journey, whether they're just starting to work out how nature affects their business, or whether they're much more developed, they're looking at already doing materiality assessments or setting science-based targets. And we see business model transformation as the sort of potentially towards the latter end of that journey, where they're thinking that having made certain operational or practice changes within the business, there might be a chance to make some more fundamental or core changes. And for larger businesses, we think this is a good opportunity to play an enabling role within their supply chain. So we think there's something that we want to investigate is the role of businesses in supporting and enabling innovative business models within their supply chain as part of their own journey towards nature positive. And then we also want to start looking then later in the year about some of the barriers that we've mentioned. So we'll be doing a series of roundtables looking at policy. This is likely to be in the UK and the EU level, and also working with our colleagues who are working on this within the A-Track project, looking at some of the finance barriers and potential solutions that I mentioned earlier. And the final step would be these kind of accelerators, pilots and demonstrations, which will be starting around probably 12 months or so from now, and then running for several months beyond that. So as I say, we're looking for people to join us on this journey. We think that this is an interesting opportunity to sort of convene groups who are already thinking about this. We've been, as Anna has said, we've identified and spoken to some case studies already of businesses who are thinking in this direction. We think there's a value to be had by doing some of that thinking together and bringing in others, experts, whether that's policymakers, financial experts, academics, practitioners of other sorts. So we really want to find a group of businesses who'd be interested in learning together on that. And we're also hoping that through that process, we can create additional tools and frameworks and guidance that will help businesses that want to adopt nature positive aligned business models. As I said earlier, I think there are different types of businesses. So I think we're very open at this stage as to what size, type, or scale of business you are, what sector you're in. But I think we'll probably find ways of sort of grouping business together by category as we go along. So if you click on the QR code, or if you scan the QR code on this slide, it takes you to a form where you can express your interest in taking part, either as a business or as another type of stakeholder who wants to feed into this work or provide some feedback or some of your insights, which we'd very much welcome. So I think I'll leave that on the slide, and then we can move into Q&A. I'll just open the Q&A function on here and see whether we've got any questions. And if you want to direct specifically, I suppose most of these might be for Anna, because she's gone through a lot of detailed and comprehensive work. So there's a question of how people can take part. So hopefully that's now been clarified. And there's a question here from somebody asking, from David Jones, asking what feedback we're getting from corporates with significant impacts. Are they feeling under pressure to adapt business models? And if so, where is this pressure coming from? I mean, Anna, I could sort of have a start at that and maybe pass on to you. I think that my view on that would be that it's still early days, that there's a lot that many businesses can do to reduce their impact on nature without going towards what we've outlined here as changing business models. But I think it's also, in some cases, a logical conclusion of achieving global goals. So if we take seriously the aim to meet the targets within the Global Biodiversity Framework, or to start setting science-based targets for nature, then we're certainly going to have to see new and different types of business model. I think there are some that are probably quite clearly unsustainable. There are some that could be improved to become more so. But maybe it's not something that's being spoken about as widely as it could. I think it's often mentioned as something that needs to happen, but not necessarily with a clear pathway as to how it will happen, which is what we're hoping to address here. I think the other thing, that the feedback that we're taking from our conversations with business and from when we presented some of this in Cali at COP16, is that because the framing of this work, because it's talking about business models and therefore it's talking about value creation, it is more thinking about the opportunities from taking action on nature. And I think a lot of the conversation so far has been about the risks, about helping businesses to identify their own impacts, their own risks and dependencies. Opportunities comes into this, but I think we're hoping that if we can have a kind of a typology and a playbook for how you can create business models that are aligned with nature positive, that will hopefully identify some of the win-wins where it's something that's commercially viable, but also doing the right thing for nature. And that is something that we're hearing of interest from businesses. So I think it's partly about shifting that conversation to think more about the opportunities, about where innovation and new commercial opportunities can come in. But Anna, did you have anything to add on that question?
Yeah, just quickly add on that obviously as I mentioned in the earlier slide, the specificity of nature transitions, the legal framework is also emerging. We know that the nature restoration law passed in Europe. There's more biodiversity, commitments related. The BNG in the UK, reporting requirements will sort of expand. But at the core level, like I said, businesses have impacts and dependencies, and that create risks. There's a lot of physical risk to supply chains that businesses are now seeing materialize. So I think the urgency of that will start to hit home a little bit more, because they are experiencing the impacts in real time as well.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'll just read through a couple more of the questions here. I think Adam was asking what commitments required of business, and I think that's kind of an open question depending on what commitments available. I think taking part in the focus groups is a first step, but we're ultimately looking for businesses to make a more kind of formal commitment, particularly to get involved in some of these accelerator programs and pilots. So that will be something more formal. We are looking for co-funding for this work. So the funding we have funds the sort of research element of this, but I think some of the more practical side, we're hoping that some businesses might be prepared to make an investment in that. So that's something that we'll need to talk about in more detail over the course of the year. So there's a kind of a spectrum of engagement or commitment. We're encouraging people to kind of express their interest at the moment and attend some of the events in the early new year. And then I think on the back of that, we'll work out in what directions we go. I think one of the things with this project is there are a lot of different strands that we could follow, but not necessarily capacity to do all of it. So I think finding some focus areas, whether that's sectorally focused or focusing on particular barriers that we want to look into in more detail, or particular types of solutions. So I think we've got some businesses already interested in committing to work with us. So I think that will kind of help shape it. So there's an opportunity to shape the next 3 years of work by getting more involved with us. Okay, this sounds like a question perhaps for you, Anna, of what financing strategies are employed along the mitigation hierarchy and for diverse types of business model. Actually, that's probably a question for our colleagues in the Centre for Sustainable Finance. So perhaps we can direct you towards the report that they published earlier this year as well, which is also part of ATRAC, which I think starts to look into that question. I think maybe my colleague Edmund can put that in the chat, or it's on our website. But that part of the ATRAC project is specifically looking at finance opportunities, and we'll hopefully answer that question in a bit more detail. And we have a question. Is there a role for consultants who help to implement your findings? There might be. I don't know whether there's anything specific to say on that. I think, you know, I suppose we're talking about wholesale economic transformation at the core of what we're talking about. So, you know, there will be, I think, a lot of roles in trying to do this. I suppose business model transformation is probably quite an ambitious thing. So I think there'll be roles for lots of people, I'm sure. I don't know, Anam, if you wanted to add anything on that, or if you've seen any other questions which I might have missed in the chat that you wanted to pick up on.
I think the sectoral approaches question is a great question as well. We are obviously, since sectoral positioning is a key boundary condition on how the business model change is operationalized, we are aware of we are looking to pick sectors that are high impact. We are also looking to strategically pick sectors on which other organizations have already started some work, so WBCST, WF, so that we can build on that work. The built environment is definitely on our radar. The work of the UKGBC is also on our radar because we have projects about retrofits going on as well, and they've done a lot of great work over there as well. So that work is definitely on our radar. Other sectors that we're considering include chemicals, maybe energy. It's still to be decided which sectors we will eventually focus on, but some of that will be based on the research that we've already done. Some of that will obviously be defined on the nature of businesses that choose to engage with the project. But like I said, we will try to have a more of a strategic focus, and built environment is definitely one of them. I don't know, Harry, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I don't. I think that covers it pretty well. As you say, there's something that we'll be looking into in more detail, but as you say, based on what's already going on, I think we're pretty much at time for this. So, as I say, click on the QR code on the screen. You can also get in touch with us by email, which it's not on this slide, but we'll maybe send that out with the recording. I think somebody asked about the recording. We'll share the recording, and I think the slides as well after this. But yes, please do express your interest via the sign-up form, or to get in touch with Anam or myself or others. We'll make sure you have those contact details afterwards, and you can ask any more detailed questions. And yeah, we hope that we'll see some of you again in 2025 as we go through the rest of this journey. So thanks very much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.